Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Women in Football's webinar Work in Progress this morning. I'm Yvonne Harrison. I'm delighted to be hosting you today with a fabulous panel alongside me. So we're going to kick off straight away just with a little bit of information around women in football, who we are and what we do for those that are new to our organisation. We're just going to put up a slide deck now, and then we'll sort of walk you through the analysis of the slides as we go. For those that don't know, Women in Football are an organisation. We're free to join, and we're all about championing gender equality within the football industry. Shruti, can I ask you to share the slides, please? We have just over 7,000 members. If we can kick on to the next one, that's great. Thank you. And we're all about kind of developing women in the industry, as well as supporting the industry to drive gender equality. If we can kick on to the next slide, thank you. We do that in a number of ways. One is about celebrating the amazing achievements of women at all levels in the game. The second, importantly, is around challenging discrimination, and we certainly see signs of that higher than we would like within the survey results we're sharing today. And also about sharing expertise. So we have a really extensive CPD programme to support people and organisations with the knowledge they need to be able to create more inclusive environments. If we can move on, please. This is just a little snapshot of the impact that we've delivered to date. We're very proud to work with a whole range of amazing partners, including Barclays, who are our lead sponsor of Women in Football and have been with us for a very long time. We do appreciate your support. Equally, we have delivered a whole range of training opportunities, our Be Inspired conference. We've got great followings on socials and everything else, and we're really thankful to our 70,000 plus social followers for being so engaged and active within our community. Next slide, please. So about today, back in April 2023, Women in Football did provide a survey out to our members and the online community to gain an understanding of what women's experiences are working in the football industry today, having previously run surveys back in 2020 and also in 2016. This year's survey was our biggest to date. There are a number of key findings from the survey, which gained widespread interest back in 2020. And it's been really interesting to see kind of the reaction to those. It highlighted some of the key challenges that the industry faced. And this survey is no different. It's very much a tale of two halves. Some things absolutely improving, and unfortunately, some things taking a turn for the worst. So sharing the results today shines a spotlight on some of the amazing progress that's been made in the football industry. And I think it's important that we recognise and celebrate that, but also some very important work that's still to be done by organisations like Women in Football and others to create safe spaces, inclusive environments where women can absolutely thrive and reach their potential, the potential they choose rather than the potential that somebody else determines for them. I'm delighted to be joined by a fantastic panel today to share their experiences on some of the key highlights of our survey. So let me introduce you to our panel. First of all, we have Kaammini Chanrai. She is the Equality and Inclusion Director at Brentford Football Club, who are part of our corporate member family, and we're delighted to have you. Kaammini, welcome. Thank you for joining us. And I'd love you to just very quickly tell the audience a little bit about your current role at Brentford.
Thank you so much, Yvonne. Hi, everybody. My name is Kaammini, Kaammini like harmony. I'll keep saying that. And I am the Equity and Inclusion Director at Brentford Football Club. I've been here for about 6 months, so still relatively early days. And actually, I've only been in football for 6 months. So prior to that, I was delivering equity and inclusion work in Warner Brothers Discovery, Vodafone, and a few other organisations. So my role is really around ensuring that our systems are fair, that we are promoting representation at all levels, and that we are really creating a sense of belonging across the organisation. So whether that's around our fans, our staff, our community, our partners, etc. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant, thank you ever so much. Next up, we have a familiar face, I'm sure, to many, Kelly Simmons, OBE, Director of Women in Football, and a whole range of other things that she's done and is doing as we currently speak. Kelly, do you want to just give us a little bit of an insight for those that don't know you of the amazing role that you've played in the development of the women's game in particular?
Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Kelly, Director of the Women's Professional Game. Came in 5 years ago to drive the development of the Women's Super League and the Women's Championship. Before that, I was Director of Men's and Women's Development at the FA, so sort of football, and a proud board member of WIF. I'm stepping away from my current role over the next month or so as the leagues come out of the FA and stand alone as a separate company. So exciting times.
Thank you, Kelly. Your next contributor for today is Shruti Patel, Senior Data Strategist for Iris Worldwide, who have supported women in football in analysing this survey and honestly have been an absolute dream to work with. We're very grateful for your insight, Shruti. Do you want to tell people a little bit more about the role that you've played in this?
Yeah, so good morning, everyone. Thanks, Yvonne. So as you kind of mentioned there, so I'm a Senior Strategist at Iris, and they were a kind of creative marketing agency. We do have a great kind of data division, and that's what I've been working with in terms of with yourselves and with Women in Football, looking at this survey, really just trying to get a sense of what is it that, you know, these respondents have been saying, what's the story here, and, you know, how have things been progressing in the football world. And it's been, yeah, great to really see some of those insights that, you know, you're going to hear a bit more about later.
Thank you so much. And last but by no means least, Katie Bowman, who is Director, Head of Sponsorship Partnerships at Barclays. Now, Katie and Barclays have been supporting women in football for many years as our lead partner, and we're really grateful that you could join us today. We know you've been very busy and out of the country with some amazing, exciting work that you're doing. So, Katie, it'd be great if you can just give a quick snapshot of the role that you play at Barclays.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us. We're always delighted to be among friends at Women in Football, and obviously Kelly. My role is to essentially manage and activate the sponsorships that Barclays have on behalf of the group globally. I'm sure that many of you know our long-term sponsorship with the Premier League, 22 years old. I think one of the longest sponsorships out there. And more recently, going into its 5th season, our sponsorship of the Barclays Women's Super League. So I've been on some of that journey that Kelly described earlier, which has been a phenomenal change to our sort of strategy and portfolio in a really good way. And obviously, can't forget Women in Football. We have been sponsors and partners and, you know, involved with Women in Football for the last over 10 years. And everything that Women in Football are doing is, I was talking to actually Rebecca Lowe when I was in the US recently about it, because she was a founding member, wasn't she? And just the way that Women in Football has come on over the last 10 years has just been an absolute privilege to be a part of.
Thank you so much. So there you go, your esteemed panel. I'm delighted that you're able to join me, and I'm looking forward to hearing the insights of everybody on this call around some of the key findings from the survey. Now, before we do take a look at the detailed survey results, let's take a minute just to reflect on some of the changes since we began those surveys actually 9 years ago, how we've evolved as an organisation, but also the industry as well. So back in 2016, the survey only asked for the opinions of women working in football, and our membership was only for women. Now we have over 7,000 members, including women, men and non-binary people. And our survey was extended to non-members for the first time, albeit many of the respondents, or the majority, were women, and they were women that were working in the football industry. We've also seen much change during this time, especially, as Kelly has mentioned, and Katie, relating to women's football and the growth of the game from grassroots right through to the elite level. The introduction of Barclays, sponsoring the WSL and the Women's Championships, the Lionesses, of course, winning the Euros, a fantastic result earlier this week. And finally, the Kaammini review, and in particular at Women in Football, we welcome the recommendation around publishing workforce data and the subsequent workforce strategy and indeed investment that's going to be needed to sit alongside this. We know from listening to our members how impactful leadership training is, our mentor training, and all the development opportunities we offer to both women directly and to the organisations that support the industry. So we know these initiatives are going to be super impactful, and we look forward to working with other partners around that workforce kind of review. And whilst it's great to see the recommendations, of course, in the women's game, and women's football leading the way actually in many ways, particularly on that data side of things, it's important to emphasise that women should still have the choice about where they work. There sometimes can be a narrative around women can work in women's football now, it's growing and there's more opportunities. And I think it's really important that we set the record straight on that. Women, like men, should be able to choose which part of football they work in. And these survey results really highlight some challenges in that we all need to kind of come together on and face. So without further ado, I won't keep you waiting any longer. I'm going to hand over to Shruti. She's going to take us on a whistle-stop tour of some of those key results. And then we're going to get into a discussion with our panel members around what that means for the industry and what we can do. So Shruti, over to you.
Thanks, Yvonne. So I guess get straight to it. It was great. This time we had a real great number of responses from the survey, just over 600, and really covered a wide range of different roles. It really covered a global community. It wasn't just respondents from the UK, but also you can see there Europe, Africa, etc. And also really varying respondents in terms of how long they've been working in football. So I think actually gives us a real great representation of a variety of different people within the space. So yeah, let's go into what they've been saying. I think it'll be obvious. Some of these stats I think are probably things that we could have expected, and some might surprise you. So to start off with, we found that 82% of women working within football have experienced discrimination at work. Now, it sounds quite high, but I don't think it's maybe that big a surprise. It is a slight increase as well compared to what we saw just before COVID in 2020. We also saw that 23% of those that had experienced discrimination also felt that they were able to report it. Now, that's almost double what we saw in 2020, which is actually great. I guess it means that more people feel comfortable, they feel more empowered to talk about it, but it's still a very low proportion. We're still talking under a quarter of those experiencing something have actually done something about it. 47% of women have experienced sexism, particularly in the workplace. I guess we've all, we can all probably recall a moment where we've maybe heard a comment in passing or kind of seen something. And I think while this figure is still quite high, just almost half, again, it is a bit of an improvement. We saw this was at 65% before COVID. So there has been some work in this space, I think, to reduce how much sexism women are facing. With sexism in particular, we see a slightly higher proportion of women that are actually reporting it, so 31%. Again, that figure was also very low at 12%. So I think with something like sexism, it's clearly something maybe slightly easier to report on. Maybe some of the other types of discrimination that you'll see we go into, it might be slightly harder to recognise or report on it in particular. 18% of women in football have experienced sexual harassment in the workplace. This stat kind of makes me a bit sad. I don't think we should still be facing such amounts of harassment in particular. That's something quite big. And this number has actually increased slightly from 15% from back in 2016 when we started the survey. 62% of women have said that they've experienced sexist banter or jokes in the workplace. And I think this is quite an interesting one that we'll go on to talk about. But disappointingly, that stayed the same. We haven't managed to reduce the amount of sexist banter, as it were. And I think that's always a fine line of what someone interprets as a joke versus what can actually come across as offensive. But it's not just about gender. There's a lot. We did ask some questions that were more around the intersectionality. So 24% of respondents have experienced discrimination based on their age, where 24% have personally experienced it. You've then got 21% who have witnessed it, and a really, really small proportion, only 3% have actually gone on to report anything related to age. If we then look at sexuality, those stats differ slightly. You've got a lower proportion, only 11%, who have actually experienced it, but a much higher proportion that have witnessed something around that. And again, only a small proportion, 7%, that have actually reported it. So I think you're starting to see the trend here, which is a lot of these discrimination, is being personally experienced, it's being witnessed, but the reporting element of it is still something that we need to be working on and making it easier, more comfortable, I guess really continue to empower women to feel that they can report it. When we look at ethnicity, again, you've got 9% personally experiencing it, a lot more, 30% witnessing it, and again, only 10% really reporting it. I know for me, this is something that's quite close to home. I've heard a lot of kind of passing comments around, you know, where are you really from? And it's got to the point where I don't even talk about it. I don't report it. I wouldn't even think about it because it's just, for me, it's the norm, and maybe it shouldn't be. And then disability. So again, a small proportion, only 4%, claim to have, you know, experienced it. 16% witnessing, but again, it's still much lower when we look at the proportion that have actually reported anything. So the football industry, what is it actually like being a woman in football? I guess this isn't maybe not as surprising, but over 3/4 of our respondents believe that conscious bias and unconscious bias are two of the biggest challenges that are facing women in the industry today. You can see on the right, there's various different challenges, and it's all quite out there. The lack of opportunities, the gender stereotyping, this idea of the males still being dominant in the industry, and you know, women still trying to find their place. 93% of members have faced an obstacle in their career because of their gender. And you can see, you know, and that's because there's a varying type of obstacles on the right that they've faced. Again, it's the conscious bias, the stereotyping, etc. And only a small 7% said that they haven't faced anything. Whereas 97% of women working in football generally, so actually the WIF members have a slightly lower proportion, and maybe, you know, that's down to the work that, you know, the Women in Football organisation are doing to kind of support that and make it a better workplace. And again, we thought it was high in 2020, but this figure's, you know, it's growing. I actually assume it's probably close to 100 still. It's just, there is an element of some people just not recognising or almost not realising what something is. 45%, so almost half of all the women working in football, are believed to be overlooked for career progression due to their gender, which again is, for me, it's really sad. We shouldn't be in the industry and the environment we're in where women are still being held back just because of the gender that we, you know, that we are. So again, really kind of difficult to see. 89% of respondents said that they were optimistic though about the prospects for women. So it's a 27% increase compared to last time. So there has been a lot of change in the industry. I think that is something we really want to recognise, is things have been moving in the right direction. There's just always that little bit more to go. And 67% of women do believe that football in particular is the sector where women can excel. I'm sure if we were to, you know, compare this survey to sort of any other industry, this is actually quite strong. You know, 67% is again, it's an increase than what we saw a few years ago. And 27% of women are feel that they're encouraged to forge pathways to the highest positions within the game. While this is up, again, it's still, I guess, much lower than what we see. Only in 2020, only 14% of women felt this way. So again, it shows that, you know, quite aptly that there has been progress, but there is still a way to go, you know, trying to get women to the top. But yeah, I think they were kind of the top results. I know that we'll be sharing kind of this deck, and there's a lot of different information on the website as well. So I'll pass back to Yvonne.
Thank you so much, Shruti. Never easy to go through all of them stats, but I'm sure people watching, you know, will be writing that stuff down. As Shruti said, don't worry, the deck will be available to everybody. It's a piece of research that we've done that we want to share far and wide, and we want you to share and use it. Otherwise, what's the point? You know, we're only going to create the change if people start to talk about these statistics and the issues and the challenges, and really look within their own organisations and others around what can be done. The really kind of concerning thing, or a big area of focus out of that for me, is obviously the reporting environment and how we make it more safe. Okay, so Kelly, I'm going to come to you if that's okay. We are making progress, we know this, and that's really important, but it's slow, isn't it? So slow, and we don't really want to continue at that pace. There's a lot of work to be done, and the results show that in the majority of cases that we've discussed, discrimination is reported, so it's low levels, but when they are reported, actually the action that people that report that discrimination see is very little. Nothing's happening. What would your thoughts be on how we can kind of speed up the process, have more people reporting the issues that they're feeling, but also what can be done or should be done to make sure that we're seeing this action?
Yeah, I think that underreporting is really concerning bit, isn't it, of the survey. I think when I looked at the results, there were two things I think that sort of sprung to mind for me. One is it's the culture of the organisations and creating an environment where people have got the confidence to step forward and report, you know, what is going on, what are they seeing or what they're experiencing. And then there's those robust policies and procedures and appropriate training for the workforce to make sure that matters are dealt with in the most appropriate way. So I feel like it needs a systemic approach, right from, you know, working on the culture and building that positive, really understanding the culture in the organisation, and tackling it where it needs to be tackled in terms of building that positive, inclusive culture, right through to making sure that robust policies are in place, including zero tolerance around harassment, again, sort of concerning numbers there, I thought, and really good communications to people to understand where they report, as well as training of the managers to make sure that it's being dealt with appropriately. So sort of culture and policies, I think, sprung to mind really when I was listening to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think your final point there around training is so important, isn't it? Because we almost, you know, when people come from one role and then into a management position or a leadership position, you almost assume that they've looked after and supported and nurtured and developed talent before. They might not have done. And it's the same sort of instance, isn't it? You know, ultimately, if people aren't aware of how to deal with this, then sometimes people could shy away. And actually, that's the wrong thing to do because it sets that tone in terms of the culture. And that's a real concern. Thanks, Kelly. One of the hardest hitting findings from our 2020 survey, and it was certainly the statistic I used the most when I came into the role, was that 66% of women had experienced discrimination in the workplace and only 12% had reported it. Now, I guess a sobering fact from this survey is that 82% of women working in football have experienced discrimination. So that's up from 66%. Shruti, are you able to kind of talk a little bit to kind of what the different types of discrimination are that people have faced, and maybe we can consider, you know, why that figure's gone higher?
Yeah, for sure. So there was, you know, a variety of options that I know that the respondents looked at. It was sexual harassment was a big one. You know, that was up by 3% compared to what we'd seen in 2016. Derogatory comments based on gender, which I think is, you know, that was again 49%. So we're saying half the respondents here were thinking, you know, still getting comments that are derogatory in passing. That is huge. Sexist banter, 69%. Again, you know, why is it that there's this fine line between what something is a joke versus actually is just offensive? You can't be saying these things, you know. You'd think people are better than that by now. Sexism itself, so 49% have experienced sexism. So again, that's nearly 1 in 2, and that's how big this is as a problem. You know, it's still widespread in terms of the type of discrimination, and though a lot of it's around gender, I know that there are, you know, there's a lot of other comments that were in there too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting as well to consider, isn't it? Yeah, if the result means there are more women who have experienced the discrimination, or more women are simply kind of highlighting it because you know, culturally it's becoming less and less acceptable. I think that's a really interesting one. Kaammini, what do you think this tells us about the culture of the football industry, and what can be done to improve things?
Yeah, thank you. I think firstly, as being someone who's quite new to football, you always look at football from the outside in, and actually being in the game is a very different experience. I will say that firstly, what I have noticed is that unfortunately this is a wider reflection on society. Women are experiencing these things across the board. And yes, the levels might be higher in football, but unfortunately it's something that still continues to be pervasive across all aspects of society. So we just need to acknowledge that and remember that there is still a long way for us to go. I think the first thing I will say is that this is completely unacceptable. You know, nobody should feel unsafe going into work. Nobody should feel like they can be discriminated against, or that they might go in and receive sexist behavior. It's just not okay. And so that's something that just shines through all of this. We just need to do something about it. I think the second thing as well is that we can't keep doing what we've always done, because we need to change something to get different outcomes. And so coming in and thinking about my perspective here, coming in from a different industry and thinking about some of the learnings from those industries and what we can bring into football is something that I think a lot about. So as an example, and I'll talk about this a bit later as well, but looking at evidence-based solutions and what actually works is really important here. So bystander intervention training, which I'll speak about later, is something that I'm really passionate about, and bringing that into football could be a real opportunity to see change in how we do things. And I think Shruti mentioned the intersectional perspective as well. I think that for me, on a personal note, is really important to consider as well. But we know that when it comes to these type of statistics, we often see higher levels of discrimination, particularly that double disadvantage that is often experienced by underrepresented groups around things like ethnicity, disability, sexual orientation. And I think just really paying attention to that and making sure that we are, when our solutions are looking at how we deal with these things, we're being really specific around what we're actually looking at and how we are affecting different people across different areas. Now, what can be done? I think looking at the results from the survey, one of the things which I'm conscious of is, we call it culture, right? We call it this culture in the football industry. And I think really disrupting the status quo is the first thing that we need to change. We need to challenge it. Otherwise, progress just won't be made. So we need to stop thinking about football as a monolithic culture and start thinking about how we can actually impact the different behaviors that we see within that culture. I think addressing certain behaviors is really important as well. And actually, you might have come across this phrase around like toxic masculinities as an example. That's something which is damaging to everyone, right? So it's damaging to all genders, and thinking about how we can really educate people around what that looks like, around how it impacts them individually and how we can change that, I think is very important. And then finally, I think being really clear on what acceptable and unacceptable behavior looks like in the workplace. We need to have better policies, processes, abilities, ways of reporting, training. I think that will make a huge difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. Really, really interesting insights there. And yeah, I look forward to hearing more of some of the things you just gave us a little taster of there, Kaammini. Katie, Barclays' sponsorship of the WSL was groundbreaking for the women's game, and you've been supporting us, obviously, here at Women in Football for over 10 years, as you said. Why is it so important for Barclays to support organisations like Women in Football and the women's game? And how does this kind of commitment to gender equality translate to the workplace at Barclays?
So I think everything we do in sponsorship is just an extension of how we think about inclusivity broadly as an organisation. So it would be really amiss of us to not run everything that we do through that lens. So it wasn't necessarily we want to sponsor women's football, because it was more that actually we sponsor the men's. So we have an inclusive policy at Barclays. We support gender diversity. So if we want to become the bank of football, which is essentially what we want to be known as, that doesn't just mean Premier League sponsorship. It also means sponsoring other groups, specifically the women in this case, at the elite level as well. Not because it's the right thing to do, or not solely because it's the right thing to do, but also because it just makes really good business sense, because 50% of the population are women. We know that financially supporting women-led companies is a really smart thing to do as well. So it's ingrained in our culture. So we don't just look at it from a sponsorship or sporting perspective. We look at it how it's an extension of what we broadly think. And I think that girls listening to those stats that Shruti just took us through, talking about how many the percentage of people that don't think that the football industry is for them. I think that supporting the women's game at elite level has had sort of a much more societal message as well. It was, we want to support women to be anything that they want to be, and football being our nation's game, why would they not think that that's for them in the playing side, but also in the working side, which is what we were referring to here. We think that women should have the opportunity to be and do anything they want. And I think that we are just talking about that through the lens of football in this case.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And some great comments going on in the chat there, folks. So keep them coming. It's always good to see delegates kind of interacting on that, certainly creating some reactions, which is fabulous. Shruti, nearly 1 in 2 women are experiencing sexism in the football industry workplace, which is incredibly disheartening. That's half of us on this call, and it's just absolutely not right. Does the survey show any signs of kind of improvement in respect of this? Was there anything that we can take from this that's going to give us any light in this context?
Yeah, I think there definitely is. It's not all doom and gloom. As Kaammini mentioned, we have done some progress, we have made some waves, but there's still a far way to go. The fact that even, we've got literally double the number of people feeling that they can report on some of these cases, like, if you think a few years ago, how much were we women, not even women, the general, in like the world, the industry, talking about these things? It was still seen as, you've got to hide it. It's going to take my career. I can't talk about this. What about my personal image? All of these things, I think, are all being questioned slightly, which is why we're seeing, nearly 23% feeling that they can report it. There's also, I think the word allies is pretty important here. We've got more people who can support others. Just because you personally might not have experienced anything, that doesn't mean you can't support someone else. Or if you witness something happening, you can talk about it, you can raise that kind of above. And I think that's what's happening, that shows that there is some positive signs. And I know that the women in football, there's a lot around how you even go about reporting something. For me, I could imagine the first thing is, okay, even if I have the intention to do it, how do I do it? What are the channels to do this? Who do I speak to that isn't going to judge me or, look down on me differently? So I think these are all the little things that we need to be doing within our small organisations that will help kind of keep pushing that that step further. So yeah, to answer your question, I think there is a little bit of positivity that comes out of it. Again, still a way to go.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a really great point. We've got to make it as easy as possible for people to report that, whether that's in their own organisations or externally. And, we're very proud to have Mish Kondareya as a legal partner here at Women in Football, and they provide pro bono support to our members. So if you do experience discrimination, please go onto our website. It's a very clear instruction on how to do that, or speak to one of our team and we'll support you in that journey. Our work with the industry obviously is massively important, including Barclays and our corporate members. Absolutely critical to this too, because we can support individual women, and that's great, and we do that. But if you go then into an environment that isn't conducive to you reaching your potential or thriving in all of the things that you want to do, then we obviously have a problem. So in that sense, that ability to do both things, support women and create support organisations to create those more inclusive environments, is absolutely critical. Kelly, you've been involved in the game a long time. What are your thoughts on, even from women that you've spoken to, like, why don't women report discrimination?
Yeah, this is an area, isn't it, that although it's increasing the number of women reporting, it's still low, and one that the industry needs to unpick, I think, and may need further research on, because it's really important to get to the bottom of this. I guess there's a range of factors, confidence in organisations to deal with it appropriately, concern on the impact of the career, which has been touched on, possibly unclear on where to report it, and the processes that would underpin any sort of stepping forward and reporting it. And the role of managers, we touched on that earlier as well, about, the training required to make sure that it's, sometimes in my sort of experience of sort of 30 plus years in the industry, there might be, you can sense, I think, from the culture of the organisation, and certain things would be allowed to happen that wouldn't be appropriate. And that's where managers and peers and male allies and people need to step in. So you've got sort of the organisational piece about the culture, and building the right culture to step forward, and the right policies. And then you've got sort of the role of everybody really, to support and challenge and provide provide that support. So I think it's a range of factors, definitely one, I think, to really sort of pick through. It's so important that we understand this more.
Yeah, definitely, and it's certainly something that women in football will be looking to kind of follow on the back of the survey. And I think you're right that, you know, sexism and discrimination is not just one part of society's problem, it's everybody's problem. And actually, if we can eradicate or certainly significantly reduce the experiences of people that are on the receiving end of this, what an amazing world we will be living in. But to your point, Kaammini, you know, ultimately this is a much wider societal issue, but sport and football in particular, you know, it has the power to change the world, doesn't it? And you know, I think everyone that works in this industry knows and can feel that, and therefore we've all got a responsibility to do that. Kaammini, from your experiences, obviously both within the football industry, but also your sort of previous career, what can businesses do to create that environment where women feel empowered and, you know, they will report these, but they have that opportunity to be who they need and want to be within that workplace?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And as somebody who's, again, relatively new to Brentford, it's still something that we're going on a journey towards. And even in my experiences of other organizations, there's no silver bullet to try and resolve these issues. But there are a few things that you can do to really build that trust. First one is, I mentioned it slightly earlier, but it was around improving policies and processes. So, you know, having a really concrete policy around things like bullying, discrimination, harassment, communicating them appropriately, making them accessible, making them in a language that people can understand so that they can then take action if they need to. And actually bringing it to life through training is really important as well, which is something that we'll be looking at. So ensuring that managers know how to support on these policies, they can signpost appropriately. On that as well, general learning, I think, is really instrumental. We've just been building out our learning plan at Brentford, and things in there that you'll see are things on psychological safety, which is really around being in an environment where you feel like you can call out behaviors or voice your opinions without fear of retaliation. Looking at training on things like behaviors and what, as an organization, you would expect from your people, because ultimately it's very difficult to change who people are. That's not something that is an organization's responsibility, but you can set a standard of what you expect in the workplace, and you can communicate that appropriately. And also training on things like how to actually call things out. So creating a framework for people to know how to do that, because we've all been in a situation where perhaps we've witnessed something or seen something, but actually really not knowing what to do about it. And that learning is something that will really benefit people. It wouldn't be right of me from Brentford not talking about data either. And I think that's something that more organizations need to look at. We need to look at more as well. And I don't just mean quantitative data like what we've seen today, which is so important and such a great foundation, but also qualitative data, like, you know, are your women telling you that they're comfortable to speak up? Are they telling you that they're worried about retaliation? Really trying to understand that so that you can be more targeted in your approach. And I think, as Kelly mentioned as well, you know, we really do need further research on this too, on things like reporting, on things like intersectionality, and seeing really how we compare to other industries. I think that would be something I would certainly welcome too. So, you know, we're still learning. We don't have all the answers, but those are just some of the things that I would certainly recommend.
Great. And brilliant for everybody that's kind of tuning in today, because I think sometimes, you know, we can watch and we can hear on these panels, but people are giving real concrete ways of how actually you can take something back into your own organization and kind of implement, learn, raise questions. And that's one of the main reasons Women in Football did this survey again. You know, having the evidence is really important. We hear daily from members really positive stories about working in the industry, but also some pretty horrendous ones. And, you know, that fear of judgment, that fear of, am I going to be classed as the troublemaker? You know, is it going to affect my future prospects? These are all very real things that we hear, and we try and support and coach women on, but also try and influence the industry, the clubs, the organizations we work with, to say this is the reality. So all of these policies, best, you know, it's great, but if the environment, that culture, you know, they say, don't they, culture eats strategy for breakfast. It's so true. And I think I really liked your point, and I would absolutely echo this around that notion of, you know, your teams co-designing the behaviors that are acceptable or not within your organization. So once people feel they own and they're part of that process, it's harder to not behave in that way, I think, because more people will call that out. Katie, obviously you talked about Barclays being an inclusive organisation, and actually all of the sponsorship activation you're doing in the world of football and with women's sport in particular being an extension of that. How, from your perspective, how do Barclays do that and create an environment where people can sort of say, hey, I'm actually not okay with that, and how do you make it easy for them to do that?
I think I would just reiterate what probably everyone else has said before about creating an inclusive culture where people feel safe. It's a safe space to speak up. I mean, some things that Barclays have in place broadly across the organisation. We have an employee opinion survey twice a year. And that asks questions about all sorts of things, but particularly about inclusivity. And I think that what we've seen over the last year is a massive rise in people actually completing the survey, because what they are seeing is tangible action off the back of it. People are so reluctant to actually fill this stuff out if they just don't think that anything's going to be done off the back of it. But when they can see actual measures being put in place because of what people have said, I think that's really important. So I think as an organisation, tell people what you are doing to address some of the points that people are raising in these sort of these surveys, which is important. What slightly different. What's interesting, and I'd be really interested to hear Kaammini's opinion on this. But the stats are saying that people reporting has gone up, right? Still not in place necessarily in where we would want it to be, but the levels of discrimination is going up also. So for me, it feels like it's a problem with people's education around what is right, the right thing to say or not the right thing to say or do, and how to behave, rather than it necessarily. I think it's a good thing that people are reporting it more. Okay, it's not where we want it to be, but actually it's the people that are doing it that's seeming to be more of the problem. So how can we educate people as to what is acceptable in this current day and age as to what women and how women expect to be treated? Because that seems to be, if that's the thing that's going up, that seems to be the problem.
Kaammini, do you have a view on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where organizational values really come strongly into it as well, because if you've got values and those are really clear to everyone at the organization, then that really sets the standard of what that behavior should look like. But I think the other thing I would just say is that more research on this sounds like it's needed to really understand that a little bit better.
I think basically education for people, in their own personal lives, because I think people can change if they are given the tools and the education to do so. They can change their mindset potentially on this. But your point around values is really key. I think Barclays have got values. We've had a really clear set of values I've been at Barclays 12 years for that entire time, and it definitely isn't something that we just, I don't know if there's any on the wall in here. There's not. We used to put them up on the wall, but it's not just something that we put up on the wall. It is something that is felt by every single person that works here. All of our grading, the way that we are evaluated in terms of performance is all based upon values and mindset as much as it is about our business acumen. So I think it is definitely something that is bred through the culture, and people are empowered to adopt it, and I think that definitely helps. So you just have less people that act like idiots, probably is the output of that.
And I guess that feeds in, doesn't it, very much to your recruitment strategy as well, being really clear on the kind of people that you want in your organisation and that you're joining, and trying to filter some of that out at the beginning as well. Thank you for that. Kelly, we know that we lose quite a lot of women from the industry because of challenges that they face working in a male-dominated industry. What can we do to try and support all women in the game and ensure that everyone kind of has a role model that they can relate to?
Yeah, I mean, it's criminal, isn't it, that the industry could be losing, or probably is losing, really talented women, non-binary people, because we're not creating the right environment, culture and environment for everybody to thrive. And I think, the sort of what we can do, in my head, I've sort of got it in three buckets. You've got the employer, the organisations. We've talked about culture. If I remembered the quote better, I was trying to think what it was. Strategy, the one about culture eats strategy for breakfast. But for years and years, and I've worked in the industry over 30 years and years. It's just all about the what you do, and much more now. Successful organisations are really thinking about the how, and that's starts with the values, and culture requires work, and having a really clear strategy to build a positive and a healthy and inclusive culture, is really, really important that leaders face into that, and that they understand what the culture of the organisation is, and whether that sort of culture checks and surveys and employee forums and so on. But what is really going on in your organisations, and in this context, how do women feel about their experiences, and confidence report, and leaders should have a handle on that. And I think that's really important, as well as all the right policies and procedures that we've talked about. Then we touched on people's individual role, and the importance of male allies in that. And then you've got organisations like Women in Football, and the work that we're doing. You've mentioned, Yvonne, the work in support for individuals, which is on the website, but the work that we're doing, I think, that's really important around the corporate membership scheme. So working, it sends a really powerful message, I think, within organisations, if employees can see that companies are partnering with an organisation in this context, specifically around gender and gender equality, to support, whether that's leadership training, mentoring, unconscious bias training, whatever those things are that the organisation feels it needs, I think sends really powerful messages as well. So I think, there's a role for all of us in this.
Yeah, absolutely. And you highlight a really good point there, is it's not a straightforward solution, is it? Because it's about personal responsibility and taking accountability for that. It's about the framework organisations set. And I am a true believer in not what, but how, like always and always, and people first. So I think there's absolutely ways that this can be progressed and accelerated. The key thing for me with all of this research, and it's definitely coming through really strongly in the chat, is about accelerating the pace of change, and that we need to do that together. No one organisation is going to do that, but we can take great practice from the likes of, Barclays and Brentford and things that are happening within our partner ecosystem, and really amplify that and share that practice. And we recently delivered to a Premier League club a session on allyship, actually. And it was specifically around male allyship, and it was really fascinating. And the very strong kind of overarching thing that came out at the end of it was that the men that were in the room with their female and non-binary colleagues were not necessarily aware of some of the challenges that those people were facing within their organisations. And, by the end of that session, they were very aware, and they were also aware of steps that they individually could take to make a difference and make it easier and more supportive of their colleagues. And they said would have different conversations back in their departments with colleagues that they would never have had before. So there is this notion of, if you don't know, you don't know. But when you do, which is why things like today are so important, and the messages that people that are on this webinar will go away and talk about within their own organisations, when you do know, then you have a responsibility, and you should act. Shruti, we know that the conscious and unconscious bias was a very significant factor in terms of things that were kind of challenging women in the football industry, and it's certainly unconscious bias training. We've seen that go up significantly over the last couple of years, and it's certainly something that we see from a corporate member perspective, that they are interested in kind of having, and we know that data is really, really important, but that on its own, it's only telling one side of the story. With unconscious bias and conscious bias, rating almost equally as the biggest challenges. Could this be a sign maybe that we're becoming better informed about and learning what constitutes discrimination and bias now, rather than just accepting it's how things are? And kind of what's your view on that particular thing, and the sort of the aspects of maybe how that's changed over time?
Yeah, definitely. I think this is one of those, as you said, data doesn't say everything. It's probably a little bit of a red herring. I think the reason that those numbers have jumped so high is because actually those terms itself, conscious bias, unconscious bias, a lot of people probably only just learned it from all of this training. It's not something that was even talked about 5 years ago. It wasn't like a part of onboarding. A lot of organisations and companies didn't have it. It's been brought in much more recently. And I think that's kind of the reason, as Katie mentioned, Kaammini's talked about as well. The first step in this journey is awareness, and that's that training is giving people that awareness. It means that they can actually label what's been happening and say, okay, this is what it is. And as you've talked about, it's a personal responsibility. I think as more and more women then talk about it and we start to see that these things are happening, we call it out. We're not accepting it any like as before. And I can imagine all of us, even on this call, have had an experience at one point, and you've just been taught a certain way. You get, you know, in one ear, out the other ear. You forget about it. It's just normal. It's just what life is. All of these kind of phrases are things that we've probably all heard and never actually thought anything about. But having the training means that you can actually label these things and say, oh, actually, it's not just accepting it. We should recognise that this is wrong. This is the wrong kind of behaviour. So I think, yeah, that's almost why we're seeing it kind of increase in the data. It's just because we have that awareness, and now we can move on to kind of what's the action off the back of it.
And just speaking about that action then, Kaammini, you know, from your perspective, what have your experiences been in tackling the conscious bias within, whether that's at Brentford or prior to that?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you've differentiated between unconscious and conscious. And actually, I'm going to be a bit controversial here and say I'm not the biggest fan of unconscious bias training, because a lot of the evidence suggests that it actually doesn't have a huge amount of impact. And in certain situations, depending on the culture of the organization, can have a negative and counterintuitive impact instead, because what you're doing is telling people what their biases are, but you're not giving them the tools necessarily to do anything about it. So that's why I keep talking about this piece around bystander intervention training, which in its simplest terms is how to call out negative and inappropriate behaviors when you witness them. And what this does, it flips it on its head. So it empowers people to be part of the change. It gives people the opportunity to say, we are all responsible for this collective culture that we create. And it addresses how you can do that and gives people tools to do that, which is why I'm a big fan of it. So there's some great trainings out there that organizations can invest in. We're developing our own internally, but I think that framework of we are all responsible and that mentality of we all have an ability to do something about it has a huge impact. A couple of other pieces, I'm a big fan of inclusive leadership training as well. So really placing the responsibility on leaders to set a standard and role model in this space. One of the exercises I've done in the past in a previous organization was around understanding your inner circle. And I think that can be quite a confronting activity for people to understand, actually, who is it that you're interacting with? Who are you spending most of your time with? Who are you getting advice from? And then how does that translate into a workplace context as well? So it can just undo and unpick some of these biases that we have and really help people to recognize what they look like. And it's also about thinking about inclusivity in things like your hiring process. And I think you mentioned it earlier, Yvonne, it's not just about diversity in your hiring process. It's about making sure that you're bringing through the right people and embedding questions around inclusivity in that process. So even in the short time that I've been at Brentford, I've been on a couple of quite big interview panels to ensure that the people that we're bringing through the door are the right people with the right values who really embody inclusivity. And I think everyone's mentioned this, but encouraging allyship is important. But for me, it has to be about with allyship, right? Anyone can put their hand up and say, I'm an ally, I'm an ally. What does that actually mean? So it's things like acknowledging privilege. It's things like doing your homework, educating yourself on particular areas, things like recognizing your own biases and behaviors. So I think that's something I'm really passionate about, put the action next to the allyship piece.
Yeah, and picking up on your point there, I was at a conference not too long ago and I overheard a conversation, and there was a gentleman that spoke to a lady, and it was about, yeah, I'm here, I'm ready to be educated by you. And the response was, it's not my job to educate you, you need to educate yourself. And I think that personal responsibility for, you know, whether that's relating to gender, ethnicity, sexuality, it sits on us as individuals, doesn't it? And I think it's a great point, actually. I'm very conscious of time, so we're going to wrap up shortly, but I just want to come to a last sort of point, and maybe just get a quick view from maybe one point from everyone on the panel, which is around, there obviously is some negativity in there, and there's lots of discussion and debate to be had around why certain things are the way they are. But one of the really positive things that came out of the survey was this level of optimism. You know, the glass is absolutely half full, and 89% of our respondents said they were optimistic about their prospects in the industry. And obviously 67% were saying they feel they can excel in this industry, which is amazing, because we know when it works well, it's so good and it's a great industry to be involved with. Maybe if I just hit you all up for one sort of thought, why do you think that is? What's contributing to that? Kelly, let's start with you.
Okay, as I've only got one, I'm going to go the growth of women's football, winning the Euros, the WSL. Our whole purpose was inspiring positive change for women and girls in society and women and girls in football. And I think the visibility of women's football and its success is helping to change the culture of the industry.
Brilliant, thank you. Casey?
Kelly took mine, so I'm just going to have to go with a slightly different take on it. But girls playing football in schools, I think it's become, because that's happening more often now. It's being played in some form in over 15,500 schools. When we came on board, it was only 3,000. So when something is played in schools, it becomes the norm, and that spreads out into wider society. So there is no question that girls should or shouldn't be allowed to play or work in or be involved in football. It is just the norm, and that's because it's happening at that educational level in schools.
Great point. Shruti, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, very much echo what Kelly and Katie said, but I think also having organisations such as yourselves being in that space, it gives people, I think, that confidence that we can make a change. There's also someone there to help us, to back us in that process, and we're not in it alone. There's a reason for its existence, and not you won't see kind of an organisation strong as this in any other sport. So I think that really does amplify why you can have, it's not just you, there's a whole army here that's willing to make a change with you.
Yeah, that critical mass and that collective voice, that's one of the biggest things that our members talk about, is we're part of a community, we know we're not on our own and we can do it together. So it's a great point. And Kaammini, finishing with you.
Yeah, I think for me, thinking about it from a personal perspective, the fact that more women are entering football, more women are working within football, and actually different people who would have never thought of working in this industry before. Like for myself, football was never something I had considered in the past, and the fact that I feel comfortable doing it, I feel safe doing it, I think that's that really speaks volumes about what's changed. And I hope that more people see that, and we begin to see that critical mass make that change for the better for everyone.
Absolutely. Right, I'm going to try and summarise in a couple of minutes if I can. There's so much. But hopefully, from just this 1 hour, and we will do more, it is the tale of two halves, but there's incredible optimism. And I think, we should be positively dissatisfied at the where things are, because we know that together we can kind of push that on. I think some key things from our panellists that I'd sort of note is the trend in reporting. Yes, it's going up, but it's nowhere near where it needs to be. There's a real sort of mirror to all of the industry to go, how do we make that better? How can we support making that better? And there's definitely further conversations to be had around that. I think this notion of there's more recognition of what's not okay, and women in particular are not happy with some of the things that maybe we would have just kind of brushed off previously. I think that's really positive, and that recognition around poor behaviours and the importance of values and culture in organisations, from recruitment right through to actually living it, rather than, as Katie pointed out, it's not just about words on a wall. It's absolutely not that. I think there's also a real nod to the systemic change that's needed, and I think there are great examples in other areas of industry or practice where systemic change takes a long time, and it takes a very collaborative effort, and it's not about one organization versus another, it's not about egos, it's about the greater good. And I think that's absolutely needed here, and the role that sport and football in particular can play in terms of societal acceptance of women and is really, really important, and both individual level, organizational level as well. I like the opportunity to disrupt the status quo. I think that was from you, Kaammini. Absolutely, we should be doing that. The best things come from disruption, and it's about creating those safe spaces so people don't feel that they can't challenge something. Challenge is good, conflict is good if it's done in the right way with the right construct sort of wrapped around that. There's definitely an element of improving policies and processes and making sure they're more visible and widely communicated. And for me, what's really encouraging, I've heard from everyone, is around the importance of the data and the anecdotal and the qualitative that sits with that, because that's where you start to build a story and ask questions. And that's where the solutions ultimately come from. So as Women in Football, we will obviously continue to do this. We'll continue to work with all of you. Thank you so much to everybody that's been on the webinar. You know, your chat has been insane. I've been trying to keep an eye on it and see what's going on. I'm just sorry we haven't got another half an hour to take some questions from the floor, but we can definitely do that in the future. You know, we will continue to support all women working in this industry to progress, and the industry itself to progress with the insights and knowledge we have from our members, our 7,000 plus. Obviously, we have that support from Mishkonda Raya. So if anybody is experiencing discrimination and wants that legal advice, please get in touch with us via our website. That's dead easy to do. To everyone that's on the call or watching this back, we thank you for completing the survey. Without your input, we can't provide statistics like this that challenge the industry, but also recognise the progress that's been made, and that's really important. I'm very grateful to our panellists. I know everybody's super busy, but honestly, your insights are really fantastic because you're bringing such different lenses to this, but there's also a lot of consistency in what you're saying, so we know they're the right things to be focusing on. A couple of final asks from me. One, if you know other people that are not involved in Women in Football, this is the shameless plug bit, get them involved. It's free to join, and we need more and more people kind of amplifying this story and voice. These results will be shared and they'll be available to everybody. We don't want them to just keep in your inbox, like share them, talk about this. That's where we create change, where we can kind of have that critical mass and that noise. And as ever, we've got a whole range of brilliant webinars, live events coming up, notwithstanding our 2024 Be Inspired conference in partnership with Barclays. That has sold out both times before we even list the people that are going to be presenting. So we're the Glastonbury of football conferences. So check us out on that. Make sure you register your interest, because it will sell out. But massive thank you for joining us this morning. I know you can choose to spend your time however you want. So the fact that you chose to spend it with us is really great, and we appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day. Thank you.